afternoon, everyone. I know you're feeling a bit drunk probably this time, a bit tired. That's okay, I can understand. Speaking of drinks, I forgot to bring one up for myself. So if I could get Evan's volunteered a hard cider, please, would be really awesome. Because by the end of the talk, I should be more drunk than I am now.
You want me to bring 3? Bring in 3.
Yeah, go ahead. Why not? See how far we get. Cool. Alright, so today I'm going to be talking about open source war stories in the context of Spree Commerce. So I'm the maintainer of the Spree Commerce, one of the maintainers of the Spree Commerce. And I deal with all the Spree user issue posts, all the GitHub posts and whatnot. But open source war stories makes it seem like I'm battling against the users, like it's allies versus axis, but it's not actually the case. What my goal is not to win the war, it's actually to make people happy through the open source work that I do. I want them to be happy when they use Spree. I want them to be happy when they use Forum. So how happy do I want them to be? Well, I want them to be this happy. This kid, I don't know, I think it's like 10 years ago now, this kid got a Nintendo 64 for Christmas. And he was like, Nintendo 64! Screaming and all that. And I also want him to be this happy. Like, no one who has hats in her hands cannot be happy. So I want them to be this happy when they're using Spree. And when I see posts, when I see emails coming through on my email client, on my iPhone for instance, I can see emails like, wow, great, thanks, you're awesome. Great art, awesome, thank you so much. And this makes me, this is like my fuel for continuing to do this open source work. So I'm going to have a graph now because everyone likes graphs, right? Yeah? Yeah? Cool. So this is a graph of all the posts of Spree user from January 2010 to January 2013. And what you'll notice from this graph is the trend line, I don't know if you can see it quite clearly enough, but the trend line is actually going downwards slightly. You'd expect if Spree was getting more popular, the trend line would be going upwards, right? Not the case. I'll get to that in a moment. What you also notice in this graph is there's a couple of points where the post-Spree user actually drop off. And this is because what's happening during the period of like July through to December, people aren't actually using Spree because they're like, we've got our e-commerce platform, if we change anything, we're going to break and we're going to miss Christmas. So they're panicking and they're not going to fix anything. But in January and February, they come back and they're like, okay, we've got our e-commerce platform that kind of did the thing we wanted to do, now we want it to do better. And some people switch over, so we get this huge influx of people through the Spree user list posting, asking questions and whatnot. So we can see this in 2010, 2011, and 2012. These are the February posts in 2010, 2011, and 2012. The February posts for 2013, however, thank you, good sirs. Oh my God, you guys are amazing. No, it's okay.
We've got more room up here.
It's okay. 3 is good. 3 I'll fall down these.
Okay.
No, I'd rather not have injury in America. I think your health insurance is like, you break a finger, $10,000.
Yeah, pretty much.
What are you, a socialist?
Oh.
America?
No, I'm just a convict. You guys are awesome. So, the February post for 2010 went up. The February post for 2011 went up only a little bit. The February post for 2012 went up a whole lot more. The February post for 2013 were absolutely insane. Now, with the February 2013 post included, you can see the trend line is now going up. What the hell happened? Well, a lot more people have seen that Spree is actually a viable thing. And this is really freaky to me because before I started at Spree, there was only 690 issues open on GitHub. And after I started, there were another 1,940 issues created. You can interpret this data in one of 2 ways. One, you can say that Spree is getting more popular and therefore more people are using it and more people are finding out it's not quite doing what they want it to do. The second way you can interpret it is that I'm a klutzy bastard who's always stuffing things up.
Have more cider.
More cider. Drink, new slide, new cider. And this graph shows that Spree is actually getting more issues over time. And this next graph shows that we're getting more comments over time, which is a good thing because it means Spree is getting more popular. And as it's getting more popular, we're coming across, it's becoming more difficult to manage such a big open source project. So 99.9% of all these issues are pretty awesome. Like people follow the contributing guidelines and they say, we've got a problem, and I'm like, okay, can you please provide some steps to reproduce the problem? And they're like, cool, here they are, we fix it, they go away happy. However, we had this issue, issue number 1247, if you want to go on the Spree project and look it up. I don't care if you do or not. This guy, sorry, that was a spoiler. This guy posted this issue about a year ago, and he said, I'm having this issue when I deploy Spree to heroku. It's coming up with an undefined method, whatever, and it's just not working. And then 4 hours later, he closed the issue stating that if you ran a command, like the sample loading command, I think it was, it fixed the issue. So between him opening the issue and him closing the issue, I had no time to look at it. So I didn't notice. And then I saw that he closed the issue. I'm like, okay, I don't have to care anymore. Good, right? Hey, that's work for me to do. This year, this guy comes along, boxfirepress, and he says, I'm having the same error, and restarting Heroku or restarting the database have not yet fixed the problem. Okay, weird. So I'm kind of snowed under because this is February. You know, Spree are supposed to double what they should be. And so I'm just giving him a terse reply and saying, I'm going to need more information. Please see the contributing guide. The contributing guide is quite detailed. It says, when filing an issue on the Spree project, please provide comprehensive steps to reproduce the version of Spree, version of Rails, list of all extensions, and the full stack trace. That's it. That's all the information we need to see an error happening. And this user, instead of providing this information, he put his hands on his hips. And he said, what part of same problem is difficult to understand? And this got me slightly annoyed. In fact, I was furious. I was like, what kind of entitled little brat does this guy think he is? So we had this little bit of back and forth. Part of it was me going, please don't expect help if you're going to be passive aggressive with us, in a completely passive aggressive tone. And he comes back with this huge post. It's like, so I was like, okay, I got to fix this guy's issue. So I tried generating an app on my local machine, and I couldn't reproduce the problem, but I was able to reproduce it on Heroku. And then once I figured out what it was, 8 minutes later, it was fixed. The reason I bring up this story is that if we see an entitled user who's angry about their problem, like they're actually having issues, you don't want their fire, like their anger fire, to keep burning. You want to try and quench that as fast as possible. So this is the whole point of it, is that I was trying to make that user happy as quickly as possible so that anger wouldn't explode. This story actually gets a little more interesting when I contacted their Twitter account and was like, who is this guy who was posting GitHub comments? And they're like, we're not sure. It was managed directly by a contractor, and they don't do their own development, but it's a variety of contractors who they subcontract through Odesk. Yes. Yeah. They have Odesk contractors who come in and do their work for them. So it's one of these guys who's like paid $5 an hour to work on a Spree store, and he just wasn't happy at all. You get that. So that happens. I'm not getting through these three-sided stream I took, I'm sorry.
Yeah, work harder.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry about it.
All right. Does anyone know who this guy is?
Tyler.
Oh, boo. Thank you, Jonah. Further helpful. This talk, I'm going to tell you right now, is not as cool as during Jonah's talk. I'm not going to just zap my brain or zap any other part of my body.
Brain on the cider.
Yeah, but I'm going to get progressively more drunk during my talk, which is going to be hilarious. Anyway, this time last year, Tyler posted a post about why he shouldn't learn Rails. And he said that we do presentations full of porn and jokes at the expense of women, a language called DongML, for refusing to acknowledge the design flaw of semicolons and URLs and the mass assignment protection flaws. And the mass assignment protection flaws was when Igor Homikov he posted an issue to the Rails tracker 1,000 years in the future, and he said, hello, I'm Bender from the future. And then he happened to make a commit on Rails using some mass assignment protection flaws. So I replied to Tyler's post, and I said, Mr. Igor Homikov is not representative of the Rails community at all. He is to me an outsider who spends his time trying to show that he's an uber league hacker by breaking GitHub or any other Rails site. So I'm going to tie this back to Spree because Homikov filed an issue on Spree. This happened to be during my vacation in January. That was hilarious. Thanks, Homikov. And he said he filed this exploit. So instead of posting to the security mailing list, he actually filed an issue on GitHub detailing the exploit and saying, please take a look at Mr. Outsider's pull request. So I think in this case, he is still trying to show that he's an uber-leap hacker by breaking GitHub or any other Rails site. We did actually merge his pull request, because he was nice enough to tell us about it at least, and not hack us. One-sided. This is good side-up, man. If you guys haven't tried this side-up, you should.
Keep trying it for it.
Oh yeah, no, keep sampling. So Spree's been going since about 2008, and from around 2008 to the time I joined, there was 4,382 commits done to Spree. Over that period of time, it doesn't seem like much at all. But if you look at the time since I joined to now, it's been about 4,016 commits in a like 1/3 the size period of time. So we're doing a lot more work, and there's a lot more work to do because the open source project is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Sorry, if I can stop burping, I'll keep talking. I think I'm done. Okay, so you can see these commits over this great graph that GitHub provides. I don't know who did this for GitHub, but they deserve like a beer or a medal or a trophy. I don't know, some kind of prize. Yeah, here, GitHub guys here. But you can see with this graph that the Spree work has been increasing since about October 2011. And it's been consistently improving since then. So I'm going to go through a couple of things that we did that I think you might find interesting. The first was an API redesign, which is this big spike here. What we had before was that we were just returning JSON stuff from the controllers, like, we're just doing format.json, render.json, collection to JSON. And it's fairly typical to do this in a Rails application if you just want to get up an API nice and quickly. The problem with this, though, is that if you ever want to customize an API response, you're going to have problems. And that's saying it lightly. Also in this API, we had a create action defined inside the base controller, which would just return text rather than JSON. So in some instances, our JSON API would return JSON, and in other instances, it would return text. And that was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. It's like a guessing game. Will this URL return text or will it return JSON? I don't know, I'm going to make the request and hopefully it returns JSON. So we looked at different APIs around the internet and we found GitHub's API. I'm going to keep going back to GitHub because they're an amazing company. And they have a great API documentation site. So you can say like, I want to list all the commits on a repository. Here's the URL. The owner is probably the owner name for the repository. The repo is probably the repo name. And then list a bunch of parameters. So their documentation for their API is amazing. Their API is amazing. And so we took after them and tried modeling our API after them. So we used the ransack gem to scope down our products. We used Kaminari for pagination and whatnot. The more interesting part is the rabble gem that we used to structure the API responses. So here we return a count, total count, current page, and pages, with just the pagination information. I think GitHub API does this in a slightly different way. And we just return products underneath this. And we did this by just extending the index template using the show template. The show template is defined like this, which just includes the product attributes and some variant data as well. The product attributes is just defined in the helper, which is fairly simple. So I think the Rabble is a great way of designing APIs, and if you guys ever want to design an API, please, for the love of all that is precious, don't use respond to format JSON, use Rabble. Or if you're sadistic and probably evil, use JBuilder. As DHH. What you may have noticed also in the use is that we have this .v1 thing in. This allows us to version the API responses, and this is done through version cake. If you ever want to version an API, please look at version cake. It's fantastic. Well said. Yeah. I'm really not going to get through.
Drink fast and run.
Okay, please don't. So then we did the Spree API. Our designer did this great representation of how the different parts of Spree interconnect. I think that's really useful for helping people who aren't familiar with Spree to understand how the different parts connect. And we've got this all open source. We completely ripped off GitHub's flow of things. So we can say, like, if you want to list products, you've got to make these requests. So that's really useful, I think. The next spike along is the authentication refactoring we did in Spree. What we had before was we had an authentication component built into Spree. And this means that if you were embedding Spree into an application, Spree would have its own concept of users and your application would have its own concept of users. And if you wanted to use your application's concept of users, Spree would be like, no, fuck off. And that would be bad. So we ripped out the authentication component from Spree and put it inside a separate gem. So now what you have to do is just say what your user class is, and Spree's like, okay, that's fine, whatever. And you generate a couple more things, like a authentication tuple file, which just defines the current user method, what the current user method is inside your application, where they can log in, where they can log out, and where they can sign up. And you use this language called the face that one guy from Spree created, Brian Quinn, which allows you to modify a view template without actually overriding the entire view template. And this is cool because you want to insert an element before the element that matches li search bar there. And what you're going to insert before that is a partial, that's Spree shared login bar. Now partial is just defined like this. So as you can see here, it just uses the Spree logout path, the Spree login path, and the Spree signup path helpers to create a login view just before the search bar in Spree. So that's useful. The second thing that we dealt with was, third thing, I can't count. Oh. Not only a convict, and I can't count as well. The third thing we dealt with was dealing with money inside of Spree. What we had was, if you would set a product price to a specific value, set the locale to say English, you would call the number to currency helper inside of Rails, and that would give you back the correct amount, $100. Yay! But if you happen to also have dual language sites, so you had an English site and a Japanese site, you'd set locale Japanese, JD. You would call number to currency again, and number to currency would dutifully just go through and say that it was 100 yen, which is slightly different to $100. I think it's about 1 to 10 or 1 to 9 or something ridiculously high like that. So we created a money class that inherits from the money gem, like inherits a lot of the functionality from the money gem. And we added a new configuration option called currency. So what this does is that you set a price in $100 US, you set the locale to be in English, you call money new product price, it's $100. You happen to change the locale to Japanese, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be $100 because you've got that currency configuration set. You can see the money class here is quite small and compact, but over time we discovered there was things we weren't compensating for, so it's growing into this massive, gigantic behemoth. Which is quite ugly also. So the next thing we did, this next spike, is the checkout flow in Spree. People wanted to customize the checkout flow in Spree because right now it goes from cart to address to delivery to payment, confirm and complete. Some people just wanted to go from cart to summary to complete. What they had to do for that was to redefine the actual state machine object used inside the order model. And this got messy if people wanted extreme logic involved. So we created this short little DSL that says checkout flow do, go to state, summary, go to state, complete, done. So the checkout flow starts off with the cart state, you go to the summary state, you go to the complete state, checkout is done. This is the kind of thing. If you want to check this out, it's in the checkout.rb file in Spree. It's actually a good way if you want to ever figure out like creating your own dynamic state machines inside the state machine gem. Check this out, it's really fun. The next, one of the other bigger spikes along here was the admin redesign. We had this shitty admin interface. It's about 0.40 in Spree. It was functional, but it wasn't beautiful. And so our designer came along and he remapped a whole bunch, which was really awesome. That's a lot better now. And then the final thing I'm going to talk about is the multi-currency stuff inside of Spree. This is actually a contribution by probably the guy with the most Scottish name ever, Gregor MacDougall. Like, can you imagine him being a Scottish war general in the medieval time? Gregor MacDougall. There's Robert the Bruce. And he's apparently like the Scottish hero, Robert the Bruce. Doesn't sound as Scottish as Gregor MacDougall. So, anyway, Gregor MacDougall and his team at Free Running Technologies came along with this multi-currency support. What this does is that if you set the currency variable, the configuration variable, to be in US dollars, you set a product price, it's going to return $100 US. If you set it to happen to set it to be Japanese, and you set it to be 50, it's then going to display as 50 yen, which is good. This allows for products to sometimes be displayed in US dollars. So if you have products that have a price in US dollars, they will be displayed. If you happen to change the currency to being Japanese, only products with the Japanese yen. Sorry?
What a deal.
What a deal, I know. It's so much cheaper. You can totally buy in Japanese currency. So if you use the Japanese currency, only products with Japanese prices will be shown on the site. So those are the features. Now I'm going to talk about the Git history of Spree. So we've got these 3 top contributors. I've done a couple of commits to Spree, about 29% of the work with commits. I keep saying work. In my rehearsals, I kept saying work, and I was like, no, it's commits. And still I say work. So Sean Schofield and Ryan Bigg. Anyway, the point is here that 55.7% of the work is being done by 3 people. If you look at what I want in the future is that we're going to need more contributors because we have that issues graph that's going up and to the right. And I have a popular project and you graph things, you want that graph to be going up and to the right. So I want more people up here. I don't know who those people are, but we'll get them eventually. A different project is the Bundler project. And you're like, okay, well, we've got the top 3 contributors of Bundler. They're Andre Arco and Terence Lee in there, but then Jose Valim's number 2. And you're like, Jose is not known for his work on Bundler. He's known for his work on Rails and Elixir and all these other things, but not for Bundler. And this is because Jose is here because Bundler was actually a fork of Thor, and Jose did a lot of work on Thor. And Bundler was actually called Bubble to start off with. I don't think that many of you would know that. So instead of doing bundle install, I think you would do bubble.blow, and if you ever wanted to destroy that, you'd probably do bubble.burst. So if you look at the commits since the Bundler project was actually formed, you would see that Andre Arco and Terence Lee are actually in their proper positions at number 1 and 2. Carl and Yehuda should have 3, 4, and 5 respectively. 73.5% of the work is done by those guys. The jQuery project. Who do you think is going to be number 1 in jQuery? No. Okay, good. John Racing's number 1. 1/3 of the commits to Spree. Who's number 2? No.
Really?
No.
I'm going to just keep saying
Okay.
that.
No.
It's a good bet.
Dave Methvin is number 2. I didn't even know who this guy was. I had to go to Google him. He's actually done quite a lot of work on jQuery, and I feel bad for not knowing who he is. Where do you think Yehuda is on this list?
Rick Sider, I'm going to keep guessing. Yehuda's one right.
No, where do you think Yehuda is on this list, though?
He's the 1%.
He's the 1%. Funny you should mention that because he is actually. He is actually 1% of all the commits to jQuery. And he's on the jQuery team mainly because he's worked on jQuary in action.
More because he was right.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. So he's done a lot of work in jQuery in action and just like promoting jQuery, and so he's on the jQuery core team and he talks a lot and talks fast. One of the bigger projects we know and love, is the Rails project. We can see that DHH has done even less than 10% of the work, which is interesting. Jeremy Kemper, Jose Valim, Aaron Parsons, Xavier Norrie, and Joshua Peak are all names that you probably know. And 63% of the work here has been done by the top 20 contributors. So what the other 37% has been done by is the other 2,155 contributors to Rails. So if you go back, the top 20 people have done 63% of the work, but about 2,000 people have done the other 37% of the work. These are anonymous people. These are people who are like, I've discovered something in Rails that is broken, I'm going to patch it. They patch it once, and then they go away. These are people who are actually improving their lives and making things better. If you look at Bundler, it's got a similar figure at about 41%. And if you look at Spree, it's got slightly higher because it's got slightly less contributors at 350. And I think what encourages contributors to actually contribute to code is great documentation. jQuery's got great documentation. Have you ever gone to jQuery's site and found something that you didn't want? Like if you've gone there and you're like, I want to figure out how this function works, and it doesn't explain how it works. I personally have never gone there and found that. The Rails guides are great. The Rails API. Oh my God, that's
Rails guys. I wondered.
the Rails guides are pretty awesome. The Rails API sucks so much. I hate searching through it. The bundled site has great documentation. But Spree itself doesn't have such great documentation. Like we've got stuff in our documentation that's still referencing SVN, and we haven't been using SVN since 2009. And point 40 was released in 2010. So we're revamping our documentation, and we're using We've got the Spree developer guides coming up now, so this will hopefully encourage more people to contribute to Spree because there's stuff that describes how products work and things that relate to products. And there's things that describe how orders work and things that relate to orders. So by us having this information, we get the knowledge out of these silos inside of Spree Commerce, and we actually share this knowledge with people. And ideally, these people will read these guides, understand how Spree works, and therefore be able to contribute to Spree. So by becoming bigger, we're running into this problem where not enough people know about Spree. To counter that, we're writing documentation. Final thing I want to talk about today is continuous integration. What was happening before is that we were using Travis. What would happen is that I would commit to Spree's general repository. That would go off to Travis. At the same time, anyone who wanted to update Spree could totally download it, whatever. It's cool. But what happens is that when I push a broken build, it goes off to Travis and it goes off to all these people who want to download Spree. 1 hour later, I'm informed that the build is broken. I go, whoops. So that's no good. All these people then have broken builds, and so we wanted to work around it. What also happens is that sometimes I can push a broken build, and that Travis will report back that the build is actually green. And you can see this here. Like, this is actually an example of this. This 3714 build is actually all green, but if you click on any of these builds, you'll see that it's actually failing. And it's definitely failing. Like, there's 37 failures. Except RSpec exited with 0, which means that Travis is like, yes, it's all working! Yay! Success! So to get onto the Travis box, there isn't actually a way to SSH to this machine and see that things are working. But we wanted that. So what we introduced was this thing called Team City, which is different continuous integration server. Team City, what this setup allows us to do is that I push off to my fork of Spree, and that then goes to Team City and reports back to me. Once everything is green, we go off to Spree, and everyone gets a good build. The thing that we didn't expect to happen was that when I run the build locally, it would take 1 minute and 13 seconds, and on Travis, it took 15 seconds less. But on Team City, it took 48 seconds less, which is stupidly, insanely fast for a build to run. It's actually faster on Team City to run the builds, the entire build, the entire setup, like clone Spree, run the setup script, run the specs, than it is to run the actual build on my machine by 12 seconds. What this allows us to do is that we get the broken builds and the good builds going through to Radar Spree, then go off to Team City and reporting back to me within minutes. And then only the people who use Spree get the good builds, which is absolutely awesome. That's actually all I've got to talk about today. All right, well, thank you guys.